Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. A clear night. Fluorescent light on polished linoleum. October 11th, 1994, Towson, Maryland. Linda May. Lester, 31, signs out of the Baltimore County 911 center after a late shift. She tells a coworker she will stop in Randallstown to pick up her 2-year-old child before heading home. She is reliable. When reliable people break pattern, it matters. She walks to her car, a routine route she's taken hundreds of times. No dramatics, just a woman ending a shift that kept other people alive. The timeline tightens right here, the window between the exit from the dispatch lot and the expected arrival for a custody pickup. On cases like this, investigators start with what can be verified and build outward. Who saw her last, what time she left, what direction she would logically travel, where a car like hers is most likely to be seen between Towson and Randallstown. In towns like Towson and Woodlawn, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. By the next morning, she hasn't shown up for work, she hasn't collected her child. Family contacts Baltimore County Police. The missing person protocol begins. Welfare checks, hospitals, a quick canvass near the dispatch center, calls to anyone who might have met her after shift. The first administrative act in the file is simple and cold. Open a report, fix the time, fix the route, and note the deviation from routine. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Days pass and a critical development lands. Linda's vehicle is located at the Ramada on Belmont Avenue in Woodlawn. Inside, officers note a stroller. That placement is not the homicide scene. It is a vehicle location, and it tells you the case has two geographies now. One is where she last worked, the other is where her car sat in public view. Between them is a corridor commuters drive every day. Then a second axis appears. October 17th, 1994. A body is found off Interstate 70, just south of the Howard County line. The medical examiner will later classify the death as a homicide and document injuries consistent with a violent assault. From this point, investigators treat the car and the body as separate scenes connected by a person, a clock, and a set of choices we can only reconstruct through evidence. No speculation, no shortcuts. You secure what can be secured, and you preserve what science may read later. Linda served on the other end of 911 calls. She kept order when other people's lives came apart. Now her absence is the call. For viewers, remember this case by its bones. Last seen leaving the 911 center in Towson, vehicle at a Woodlawn hotel lot, body recovered along I-70. Those are the fixed points. Everything else, motive, opportunity, identity, will have to meet them. Ramada, Belmont Avenue, Woodlawn. The car matters because it fixes a point on the map between where Linda ended her shift and where she planned to pick up her 2-year-old. Patrol logs note the find. Detectives secure the lot, mark the stalls, and start routine questions. Manager on duty, front desk, maintenance, any overnight events that would push overflow parking. This isn't the homicide scene. It's a placement. In cases like this, a vehicle found in a public lot tells you two things. Someone wanted it seen, and someone wanted to move on. The first decision is chain of custody. The car is photographed in place, then towed to a controlled bay. You work outside to inside, doors, handles, window rails, trunk seam, then the cabin. You document what's visible, not what you hope is there. Inside, officers note a stroller. That single item reinforces purpose. She intended a custody pickup after the Towson shift. It also sets a baseline for later testimony, what she carried, what she planned, what was left behind. Next comes the geography check. Leaving the 911 center in Towson, a driver bound for Randallstown can pass through Woodlawn depending on the chosen route and traffic. A hotel lot off Belmont Avenue is convenient, open, and anonymous. It's also a place where a car can sit for hours without neighbors calling it in. Investigators run a quick perimeter review. Nearby businesses, curb cuts, camera housings, if any were present in 1994, and sightlines from the lobby to the parking apron. In 1994, coverage was inconsistent. If a lens existed, it was often analog, low resolution, and overwritten routinely. That means witness memory, valet, security, night manager, matters more than it would today. What can a car tell you when it won't talk? Clock the cooling of the engine if it was found soon after arrival. Check whether interior lights were disabled. Look for misaligned floor mats or seat tracks out of their normal notches. None of those details alone prove an assault. They help you decide whether the driver who parked here is the same person who drove away, or whether no one drove away at all. You also note where the car sits relative to exits. People dispose of vehicles where they can leave quickly, on foot, or in another ride. That suggests a direction of travel. It doesn't identify a person. The canvas is technical and dull, but critical. Detectives ask about recent car break-ins, disturbances, and whether a stroller in a front seat or back would draw attention here. They review guest registries where available, looking not for a match to Linda but for patterns. A room paid in cash at odd hours, a plate recorded on a courtesy patrol log, a taxi drop repeated on consecutive nights. In towns like Towson and Woodlawn, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. People remember what doesn't fit. Investigators rely on that. The lot also helps narrow the timeline. Linda leaves the Towson Center late on October 11, 1994. The car is found days later at the Ramada. The gap between last seen and vehicle located is where most cold cases stall. You manage that gap by putting fixed pins on a wall: dispatch exit time, realistic drive time, any calls made or missed, and the first verified sighting of the vehicle at Belmont Avenue. That is the corridor you'll test against future lab work and interviews. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Human value isn't a speech, it's a practice. This scene shows why families are told to preserve everyday details: routes, refueling habits, the side of a lot they prefer, because those details give investigators a most likely model to test. The stroller is not drama. It's a fact that keeps the case grounded in Linda's routine as a parent and a dispatcher who planned her night by the clock. Here's the operational takeaway for viewers who live with custody exchanges or late shifts. Choose well-lit lots with staffed lobbies, log your route with one person in real time, and if you must stop, fix the stop in a text, place and time. That small step gives police a tighter corridor if something goes wrong. What this scene does not do is answer motive or identity. It doesn't have to. Its job is to hold a place in the chain. Towson, Woodlawn lot, later recovery along I-70. When this case moves forward decades later, laboratory results will be tested against this corridor. The car in Woodlawn is where that alignment begins. The discovery comes on October 17, 1994. A caller reports a body near the shoulder of Interstate 70 just south of the Howard County line. Patrol responds first to secure the mile marker, then detectives and the medical examiner's office arrive. Traffic control is set. Photographs establish approach lanes, embankment grade, and the position of the remains relative to the guardrail. This is the homicide scene. It is treated as its own track, separate from the vehicle placement in Woodlawn. Identification proceeds by steps. Clothing matches the description entered when Linda Mae Lester was reported missing, a dispatcher coming off a late shift. Personal effects are logged. A rapid review of scars, dental features, and employment-issued items narrows identity before formal confirmation. The priority at scene is simple: capture what natural light and weather will erase. The external exam documents injuries consistent with a violent assault. The medical examiner records evidence of strangulation. There is also a sharp force injury to the neck and signs of blunt force trauma to the head. A plastic trash bag has been placed over the head. Defensive wounds appear on the forearms and hands, indicators of a fight for life, and, for investigators, an opportunity. Fingernails are examined in place. When feasible, clippings are taken later under controlled conditions to preserve any skin cells or trace material. Those small envelopes go into storage with strict chain of custody forms. In 1994, that is diligence. In 2025, it will be decisive. Scene technicians grid the slope and shoulder. They collect soil samples upslope and downslope, document transfer patterns on clothing, and note plant material that might tie the body to another location. Tire impressions are photographed if present. The shoulder is checked for recent stop marks. Nothing about this location is random to an investigator. Highway access offers speed, noise concealment, and distance from the act itself. The working hypothesis is transport, killing elsewhere, dumping here, but it remains a hypothesis until evidence confirms it. The time of death window is estimated using ambient conditions, body temperature trends available to pathologists at the time, and the last verified contact from October 11th. Wildlife activity, weather over the intervening days, and any insect activity are recorded. None of these elements alone will provide a precise clock. Together, they can narrow the interval enough to cross-check alibis and sighting claims. Back at the office, the autopsy formalizes what the scene suggested. Cause of death is ruled homicide. The patterning around the neck is described in clinical terms. The sharp force injury is measured. The blunt force trauma is assessed for directionality. Toxicology panels are ordered as standard. Swabs are taken from zones with the highest chance of contact DNA, and the fingernail clippings are sealed, labeled, and retained. In 1994, these actions are routine. They become the bridge across decades. This chapter in the file also triggers the next operational step. Map the corridor. Towson, where she finishes work. Woodlawn, where the car appears. I-70, where her body is recovered. Detectives don't need motives now. They need sequence. Who had the ability to intersect Linda between those points? Who had access to transportation and a reason to choose a highway shoulder over any other dump site? Who knew her schedule well enough to exploit the end of a late shift? These are not dramatic questions. They are interview lists, pull sheets, and canvas routes. There is a human reality here that belongs in the record without sentimentality. Linda worked the other end of emergencies. She was the calm voice when people dialed 911. The respect due to that service appears not in speeches, but in how carefully her death is documented, so that science, when it advances, has something solid to read. A word to those who move through similar routines, night shifts, custody exchanges, predictable routes. Fix your stops in a message. Use staffed places when you can. These are not guarantees. They are multipliers. More cameras, more witnesses, more starting points if something goes wrong. Communities hold together on small habits like that. The I-70 scene does not tell us who. It tells us what, where, and how. And in a case that will wait 31 years for a lab result, the how is what survives. When later reports speak about mixtures under fingernails, they will refer back to this day, this exam, these envelopes, this chain of custody line that starts on a Maryland highway embankment. The body scene locks the what. The next job is the who intersected her life that week. Detectives start the way most homicide squads do, move outward from the person who vanished. Co-workers at the Towson 911 center confirmed the end-of-shift time and that she said she'd pick up her 2-year-old in Randallstown. Supervisors provide schedule sheets and any call logs showing when she signed off. It fixes the last verified window without speculation. Family interviews are first-day priorities. They're not about motive, they're about routine. Who did she trust for handoffs? Which nights did she work late? Did she change routes when it was dark? Those answers build a most likely path from the dispatch lot to the pickup address. Friends add context that a spreadsheet can't. Times they escorted her, concerns about tension during the separation, how carefully she planned around that. In cases involving custody, detectives document every arrangement because small deviations can matter later. From there, the circle tightens to people with proximity and opportunity. You don't brand anyone a killer in an interview room. You test accounts against the clock. Was the person home, at work, with someone else? When a case spans multiple scenes, the Woodlawn hotel lot and the I-70 shoulder, you compare those answers to drive times and practical access. The principle is simple. If the timeline can't carry the story doesn't stand. The Woodlawn car placement adds a second vector for questions. Investigators check the Ramada's staffing on those mid-October nights and ask if a stroller in a parked car would have stood out. They look at any courtesy patrol notes from security or maintenance, and they ask for guest names when policy allowed in the 1990s. This is tedious, not cinematic, but it's how you learn whether the vehicle sat untouched or if someone hovered near it. Without modern surveillance, witness recall is the only lens. On the interstate corridor, troopers and county detectives coordinate a lane-by-lane reconstruction of where a vehicle would pull over without drawing attention. They don't need an exact mile marker for an abduction theory. They need to know what's realistic for a quick stop with cover. That analysis pairs with the autopsy findings you heard in the last segment. If death likely occurred before the body reached the shoulder, the highway becomes a disposal site, not an assault location. It narrows where a suspect could have taken time and privacy, and it reshapes which alibis matter. Because we're in 1994, the technical path is limited. There's no cell site accuracy like today. There may be pager numbers and landline records, but not the map overlays modern investigators rely on. So the file leans on verified timestamps: the exit from the 911 center, the vehicle's appearance in Woodlawn, the body's recovery on October 17th. Each interview either fits cleanly between those pins or it doesn't. When someone's story covers the exact gaps a detective is most interested in, the next step is to ask for independent confirmation: another person, a receipt, a shift log. Detectives also document what's not there. No forced entry noted at the vehicle. No theft pattern to explain why the car was taken and abandoned. Those negatives don't solve a case, but they stop the investigative team from chasing the wrong type of suspect. You use absence to save time. The estrangement sits in the background because it's part of the real life she was living. Separation means schedules, pickups, and often conflict. Police practice is to interview intimate partners early. That is not a conclusion, it's procedure. If someone knows her routines, they're more capable of intercepting her between Towson and Randallstown. The interview questions stay narrow. Where were you after 11 p.m.? Who can verify it? When did you last see her? Did you have plans that night? Each answer is written down word for word because years later, phrasing matters. In parallel, the team pulls simple but telling records: time cards, hospital checks, towing lists, any prior calls for service to addresses in her immediate circle. Cases go cold when those basics aren't locked early. This one did not fail on basics. It stalled because the science of the time couldn't extract what later technology could. So the investigators made the best choice available in 1994. Preserve. Fingernail clippings, swabs, clothing, bag, all the items most likely to carry contact traces if a struggle occurred. They could not know that those envelopes would hold the voice the case needed decades later. They only knew they had to keep them. There's a human piece to interviews that isn't about tears or speeches. It's the way a detective thanks a parent for a calendar entry they kept, or a coworker for a minute exact memory. Those details aren't sentimental, they're operational. In towns where people know each other's routes, a clean recollection at the beginning can replace 1,000 guesses at the end. By the time the early interview cycle closes, the case file has what it needs to stand: a verified last scene, a vehicle placement that looks intentional, a body recovery that establishes homicide, and a set of statements organized against a realistic drive map. The team will revisit these interviews more than once across the years. Stories shift. Evidence doesn't. And in a file like this, what you can hold on to is what you saved on day one. Time doesn't solve homicides. Paperwork and preservation do. After the initial surge in October 1994, this case moved into the phase that tests agencies more than any chase ever will: years of maintenance without losing the thread. Baltimore County retained custody of the evidence. The file stayed active enough to be reopened when technology caught up. That's not glamorous. It's the guardrail that prevents a case from turning into folklore. The investigative team formalized what had been learned. Last seen late on October 11th, leaving the 911 center in Towson. The car located later at a hotel lot in Woodlawn. The body recovered October 17th off Interstate 70 with the medical examiner ruling homicide. Those 3 pins were the spine of the file. Every review session that followed began with them, because consistency is the only way you recognize a new lead when it appears. Preservation protocols mattered. The clothing was dried and sealed. The plastic bag recovered at the body scene was packaged. Swabs from relevant areas were stored according to 1990s standards. Most importantly for what would come, fingernail clippings from the right hand were taken and logged. In 1994, that's routine. Fighting hands collect trace. In 2004, 2014, and 2024, those envelopes become potential voices. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. You keep what might speak, even if you don't know the future language. Cold case work isn't constant. It's cyclical. Detectives rotate, supervisors change, budgets tighten, and forensic science moves in step years later. What holds is the discipline to revisit, even when nothing obvious has shifted. The Lester file saw those reopenings. Each pass asked the same ruthless questions. Is there a test we couldn't run then that we can run now? Is there a witness we couldn't find then who's reachable now? Are there records, employment, insurance, property that looked ordinary in 1994 but read differently with hindsight? There were interviews that earned another call. People who had moved, people who were ready to talk because distance blunts fear. Each fresh contact was anchored against the spine: Towson's end of shift, Woodlawn's vehicle placement, I-70's body recovery. If a statement wandered, the map corrected it. If an account sounded polished, the clock tested it. You don't debate motives in cold case follow-ups, you place people between fixed points and see if the picture holds. Administratively, the best move was simple and patient. Inventory and re-inventory the box. Make sure every sealed item is accounted for. Confirm storage conditions, log who has handled what, and note any items that can now be analyzed with higher sensitivity. This is where the case beat the odds. Nothing went missing. Nothing degraded from neglect. That's why the story can keep moving in 2025 without guessing. The decision to resubmit right-hand fingernail clippings arrived after one of those methodical reviews. By December 2023, private and public laboratories were offering assays that could read mixtures at levels unthinkable in the mid-1990s. The team pulled the envelopes, verified seals, and initiated a modern submission. That choice didn't come from a sudden confession or an anonymous letter. It came from a checklist. Could current technology isolate contributors in a way that 1994 couldn't? If yes, you send the right item, the one most likely to carry contact from a struggle. The move also respected legal hygiene. A mixture result, if it came, would be evidence, not a narrative. It would need to be supported by the chain of custody, the integrity of the storage, and the logic of the case's geography. Towson, Woodlawn, I-70 isn't a slogan. It's the framework a prosecutor and a defense attorney will both use. Cold case detectives know this. They don't look for magical answers. They look for one more verified line in a file strong enough to be read in court. There's a human layer to these long stretches that's worth stating without drama. Families show up at anniversaries and ask if someone still cares. Colleagues who trained with Linda remember the way a dispatcher's presence steadies a crisis. The right response from investigators is not a promise. It's a plan. Here's what we can test now. Here's who we're calling back. Here's what we're preserving for when the next leap arrives. That steadiness is how a community understands that a case is dormant, not abandoned. The resubmission went forward. The lab request specified the samples, the historical context, and the need to analyze potential mixtures beneath 2 fingernails from the right hand. The file noted that results would not rewrite 1994. They would either add one more anchor point to the spine or they would not. That is the honest posture of cold case work. Hope tied to process, not to wishes. In towns that still remember Linda's shift and her route, that transparency builds the only trust that lasts. For those watching who navigate similar realities, late shifts, custody exchanges, predictable routes, the lesson from this period is practical. The most valuable thing you can do for your future self is document now. Tell someone your plan when you leave work. Use the same safe locations. Save messages that fix your timing in plain text. If nothing bad ever happens, it's just routine. If something does, you've given investigators a corridor, not a guess. When the envelopes left the evidence room in 2023, the case didn't become a headline, it became a test queue. That is how real life works in long files. No music, no sudden flash, just paperwork and a barcode. The story continues because somebody kept the box closed until it was time to open it again. The case moved again when a sealed envelope left evidence storage in December 2023. It held 2 clippings from Linda Mae Lester's right hand. Those clippings had been taken in 1994 as routine preservation. In 2023, they became the best chance to identify who made contact during the assault. Chain of custody was verified, seals checked, and a modern laboratory was asked a narrow question. Could today's methods detect and interpret any mixture present under those nails? Weeks turned into months. There was no headline, only status emails and patience. On September 26, 2025, the result landed. The laboratory reported that a DNA mixture from beneath 2 fingernails on the right hand includes the genetic profile of Donald Lester. Includes is deliberate language. It means the laboratory's statistics support that his DNA is present within the mixture, not that he is the sole contributor. In homicide work, that phrasing matters. It is not a story. It is a data point anchored by chain of custody and the known struggle injuries documented in 1994. Detectives read the report, then read it again. They compared it to the spine they had built for 3 decades. Last seen leaving the 911 center in Towson. Vehicle located later at the Ramada on Belmont Avenue in Woodlawn. Body recovered October 17, 1994 off I-70. Fingernail clippings preserved. The readout did not change those facts. It connected them. Fingernail evidence tends to be close contact evidence, often from grabbing, blocking, or fighting back. When the lab says includes, investigators ask whether any innocent explanation survives the timeline, the relationship, and the geography. If the answer is no, they prepare a warrant. The affidavit didn't rely on the DNA alone. Cold case work layers evidence, so a single test doesn't carry the whole weight. Prior interviews, documented tensions surrounding a separation, the predictability of a late shift followed by a custody pickup, those details returned, not as motive speeches, but as context. A judge needs to evaluate probable cause. The case had always been constrained by the limits of 1994 technology. Now it had one scientific bridge across that gap. The arrest operation followed quickly. On September 30th, 2025, Baltimore County detectives and deputies went to a residence in Randallstown with a warrant. This was not a takedown built for television. No chase, no standoff. It was planned around safety and respect for neighbors. A morning approach, clear commands, custody without incident. Inside the file, the entry is brief. Time, location, warrant served, subject transported. Those lines are the hinge between decades of uncertainty and the first day a court can hear evidence. A public briefing came on October 3, 2025. The message was direct. The case is charged, the defendant is held without bond, the presumption of innocence applies, and further comment will follow in court. For Linda's family, the significance is not in adjectives, it is in structure. A docket number replaces a rumor. A hearing date replaces an anniversary visit to a gravesite with no progress to report. Justice work is administrative before it is emotional. For viewers who think about the long arc here, notice what actually changed the file. It wasn't a confession or an anonymous tip. It was the clean preservation of trace evidence in 1994 and the decision to retest intelligently in 2023. That's the lesson. Procedure carries cases across eras. If you work nights or manage custody exchanges, the practical takeaway is to document your movements and keep your routines in staffed places. If something goes wrong, you want your life to leave a trail that science can follow later. The lab's includes finding is not a verdict. It is a piece that fits the known events of October 1994 and supports the state's charge. It will be tested in court alongside interviews, timelines, and every defense argument available. That's how the process should work. What matters for this narrative is that a quiet envelope, sealed 31 years ago, still had something to say. The evidence didn't get louder over time. We finally learned how to listen. The lab report gave detectives probable cause. The court needed a case. Within days, the state's attorney filed a first-degree murder charge in Baltimore County. Paperwork moved fast. A criminal information opened the file, a no-bond hold kept the defendant at the county detention center, and a brief first appearance set the ground rules. Counsel appointed or retained, discovery to be exchanged, next date on the calendar, no drama, only the structure a homicide case demands. Charging documents summarized what has been built since 1994 without padding. They fixed the same three coordinates we've carried through this narrative: end of shift in Towson, vehicle placement in Woodlawn, and the I-70 recovery, and added the 2025 DNA result, a mixture under two right-hand fingernails that includes the defendant's profile. The affidavit referenced prior interviews documenting a contentious separation and a predictable custody pickup after late shifts. It didn't argue character. It argued access and opportunity aligned with a violent confrontation. The defense response was immediate and familiar to anyone who follows major cases. Counsel emphasized the presumption of innocence, community ties, and the time elapsed since the alleged crime. On the science, the word includes became the focus. A mixture, they said, is not a single-source fingerprint. It requires careful interpretation and rigorous chain of custody proof. Those points are not noise. They are the tests any court will apply before a jury hears DNA statistics. The courtroom is where adjectives disappear and method remains. Prosecutors, for their part, kept it narrow. They pointed to the long-preserved evidence, the defensive injuries noted in 1994, and the absence of any innocent explanation that fits the mapped route and timing. No request for sensational restrictions, just a detention argument centered on the seriousness of the offense and the strength of the physical record. The judge maintained the no-bond status, noting the gravity of a 1994 homicide now supported by modern analysis. Behind the scenes, both sides prepared for the next phase. Discovery began. Lab notes, bench sheets, electropherograms, and chain of custody logs for the fingernail envelopes, autopsy photos and reports, interview transcripts, and any prior statements that would need to be reconciled with current testimony. Pretrial motions were flagged on DNA admissibility, on any statements the defendant made, on the scope of expert testimony. In practical terms, that means the case paused for lawyering while the family, the surviving colleagues from the 911 center, and a county that remembered the headlines waited for a date. By October 6, 2025, the day we're telling this part of the story, the public posture is simple. The state alleges that an intimate partner dispute after a late shift ended in homicide in October 1994. The body was recovered off I-70. Preserved fingernail clippings now support the charge. The defense says the science is not a verdict, and the passage of time makes memory unreliable. Both are correct in their lanes. Trials are not about who is loudest, they are about what can be proved piece by piece under rules that protect everyone. There's value here that has nothing to do with spectacle. Cold cases advance when agencies keep evidence intact and when courts insist on method. Families get answers when a community tolerates the slow work, cataloging, retesting, turning sealed envelopes into testimony. If you're watching this with your own late-night routine or your own custody schedule, the lesson is as practical as ever. Tell someone your route, pick staffed places, and leave a trail that can be read years later if it has to be. The update came quickly after the warrant. Baltimore County announced the charge, the no-bond hold, and the next steps that move a homicide from rumor back into court. No theatrics. Just what the public needed to know and what the law allows before trial. The line that stayed with people who knew her was brief and right on the mark. Justice does not fade with time. Science can return a voice that was quiet for 31 years. It didn't claim a verdict. It marked a transition from uncertainty to process. Here is the spine we do not change. October 11, 1994, Linda Mae Lester leaves a late shift at the Towson 911 Center and plans to pick up her 2-year-old. Her silver Ford is found days later at a hotel lot on Belmont Avenue in Woodlawn. On October 16th, a body is recovered off Interstate 70. The medical examiner rules homicide by strangulation with additional trauma. The file cools, but it is preserved correctly. In July 2025, the cold case unit resubmits sealed evidence for modern testing. By late September, the DNA report ties preserved material from the case to Donald Lester, 68. On October 3, 2025, detectives arrest him at a home in Randallstown. One corridor, Towson to Woodlawn to I-70, carried intact across 3 decades. At the lectern, the state did what good prosecutors do pre-trial, keep it narrow. They summarized the fixed timeline and the lab result, explained that the defendant is presumed innocent, and confirmed that discovery would be produced to the defense. No motive speeches, no media trial. On the other side, the defense took the posture the Constitution demands: contest the science, scrutinize chain of custody, and remind everyone that years have passed and proof belongs in a courtroom. That is not a distraction. It is the safeguard. What changed for the family and for Linda's colleagues was not a headline. It was structure. A docket number exists. A hearing will be set. There is a place and time to test every claim and every piece of evidence under oath. For people who work nights with her, that matters more than adjectives. It means this is no longer a story traded in fragments. It is a case with rules that will either carry a conviction or they won't. Either way, the path is clear and singular. No second ending, no split narrative. There is a human center here that deserves a few direct sentences. Linda was 31, a dispatcher whose voice steadied strangers during their worst minutes. She was also a mother managing shifts and a custody schedule in the most ordinary way. Finish work, pick up, go home. Cases like this remind us that routine is not protection, but good procedure can be. Agencies that inventory carefully, seal correctly, and revisit evidence when science advances give families the only currency that lasts: credible answers. That is what kept this file alive long enough for a lab to speak in 2025. If you live a life that looks like hers, late hours, predictable routes, handoffs that repeat each week, there are practical habits worth adopting without fear or drama. Fix times and locations in a message. Favor staffed places for exchanges. Tell one person when your plan changes. If nothing happens, it's routine. If something does, you've drawn a map investigators can defend years later. Safety isn't one big move, it's a chain of small ones that leave a readable trail. The rest belongs to court. The state will lay out the preserved physicals, the root evidence, and the 2025 DNA result that match the preserved samples to the charged suspect. The defense will challenge method and meaning. A judge will decide what the jury hears. That is how serious cases move in Maryland, and that is where this one now stands. We close on a single, honest point. A cold case is now an active prosecution. Nothing more and nothing less. I've walked you through Linda Lester's case, and here's what I carry forward. Routine doesn't guarantee safety, but small habits do. Text your plan, choose staffed locations, tell someone when it changes. Justice works when evidence is preserved and due process stays strong. Now I'd like your take. In this record, what matters most? The fixed timeline, the preserved evidence, or the 2025 DNA? If this story resonated, drop a comment with your thoughts or where you're watching from. If it didn't, tell me why. And if you want more real, careful cases, please subscribe to the channel to stay with us.